John chapter 12. This is kind of the end of a public discussion that John has been recording. If you remember, those of us that have been studying through the Gospel of Matthew, and I think you ladies who went through the Gospel of Matthew earlier, you probably have noticed that it's very chronological most of the time. He's just dealing with, not always, that's not a strict rule, but generally speaking, it's chronological. Matthew, Mark, Luke, they all deal with stories. It's usually about healings. They do a lot of things, whereas John records a lot of the dialogue going back and forth. You might notice, okay, here's a miracle that I remember being recorded in some of the other Gospels, but there's an extended dialogue there that's not recorded in the other Gospels, and John has all those. And that's kind of the unique thing about John. And John has a lot of discussion back and forth, but this is the last of the discussion. And you might notice, even as we read through this, and then as I begin to preach through this and try to explain and teach this to you, you probably notice this kind of sounds familiar. In fact, I hope it sounds familiar. If it doesn't sound familiar, you've missed a few sermons. Go back and get the DVDs from the past and watch some of the previous ones. But it starts to get a little bit repetitive, because John records one discussion after another, and they really kind of come to the same place every single time. It's Jesus explaining to them, hey, I am not just representing myself, I'm representing the Father that sent me. Why is it so important that John keep recording these conversations that seem to kind of come back to the same place? I mean, all the way back in chapter 6, it starts off with them, hey, we want to make you king, and it kind of comes back to the same place. And then chapter 7, there's the same kind of discussion, and then chapter 8, and chapter 9, chapter 10, and we're on chapter 12, and it's almost the same thing that Jesus has been saying over and over and over again. And that is, first of all, it's emphasizing his divinity, but not just Christ's divinity. He's not just a God. He is the God. And he wants to identify himself with the God of the Old Testament. And this is even something, it's funny that in his day and time, everyone accepted the God of the Old Testament. All the Jews that were standing there listening to these conversations, they had no question. I mean, we remember back in chapter 9 with the discussion with the blind man, they said, oh, you can be Jesus' disciples, but we are the disciples of Moses. We recognize that the Old Testament is truth, that the God of the Old Testament is our God, that he's the God of Isaac, Jacob, and Esau, that he's our God, that we represent him. They had a clear understanding. It's unfortunate that nowadays it's somewhat flipped. Even in Christian circles, the concept is somewhat filtered in that Jesus is somewhat of a different God. And this really goes back to the Gnostics, which really goes back to the very beginning of Christian history, is some people believed, I've got a problem with the God of the Old Testament. He sounds really angry. He sounds really vengeful. He sounds really scary. So I don't really like that God. I like the God of the New Testament. I like the Jesus of the New Testament, so I'm going to sideline the God of the Old Testament, maybe not even believe in him. And this has crept into modern day churches today, where they say, well, yeah, there's a theory that's discussed in Christianism, is the theology is dispensationalism. Now, I call myself a leaky dispensationalist. If you really want to get into discussion of that, I'd be happy to talk about that in detail. But some people take this argument of dispensationalism so far that they dismiss the entirety of the Old Testament in its entirety. It's written to the Jews. It's not relevant to us. You don't even need to read it or memorize it or even understand it or study it. And that is not the truth. That is not what John is saying here. John is saying, he's recording the words of Jesus, which is Jesus saying this. He's saying, hey, I'm the God of the Old Testament. I represent the Father, the Creator of all things in the Old Testament. I represent him. And we go into later on to the church. First of all, it's all just Jews in the first few chapters of Acts. It's all Jews. But all of a sudden, Peter goes and he preaches to this guy named Cornelius. And what is he? He's a Gentile. He's a Roman. And Peter preaches him, and this Roman says, you know what, I had a dream telling me that you were going to come and preach the gospel to me. I'm going to accept this. This is truth. And he gets saved. And all of a sudden, the church begins to expand, not to just Jews, but to Gentiles. And the whole discussion of some of the New Testament is Paul saying, hey, what is the new rules for these Gentiles? Do they have to follow all the Levitical laws? Do they have to become circumcised, become a good Jew, to become a Christian? What is the process for this? And the whole discussion culminates and they need Jesus Christ. The Old Testament is relevant to them to a certain extent. They don't have to become a good Jew. They don't have to be circumcised or follow all of the Levitical laws, but yet they're still relevant. It's still important, and it's still something we need to teach and preach And the Psalms should mean just as much to you today as they did to David when he wrote them down. The Old Testament is relevant. We do not want to dismiss it in any way, shape, or form. And the God of the Old Testament is the God that Jesus Christ is. He's identifying himself with that God. And that's why we have prophecy. That's why John has prophecy in this passage. What does he talk about? Isaiah, as some of you might have in your Bible. Some of you might have a better translation, which actually says Isaiah. Now you have to remember that the New Testament is written in Greek. So if you're taking a name out of the Old Testament, which was originally written in Hebrew, you then translate it into Greek, and what do you have to do? You have to transliterate the name, because if you just wrote it in Hebrew, they'd be like, what in the world? That looks really weird. I can't read that. So you transliterate it into Greek, it becomes Isaiah, because they don't in the Greek. But we know that it's Isaiah, okay? The writer John is speaking of Isaiah. He's writing it in Greek, writing the name in Greek rather than Hebrew. But he's speaking of Isaiah, and he's saying, hey, there's the prophecy that I'm dealing with here. So I have 2 points this morning. And we'll try to move through the first one as quickly as possible so we don't get too stuck on it, but it's important to discuss. Number 1 is darkness, and number 2 is light. That's all the points. You'll see them, number 1, number 2, on your paper there. You don't even have to write them down. It's all there. Number 1 is darkness, number 2 is light. Okay, so we see here in the beginning part of our chapter, part of our passage here, verses 37 through 44, through 43, we have a discussion of why they're rejecting Jesus Christ. Why is it that they're not believing in his words? And then they're in darkness. And then verses 43 through 50 is Jesus' final presentation to them. This is it. What's going to happen next? If you look at the next chapter there, in chapter 13, you will see that Jesus is now alone with his disciples. He's speaking to them. The rest of John is mostly recording those words that were said in the upper room. You remember Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the discussion there, it's pretty simple. It kind of talks about maybe some things that Judas did, some things that Jesus did, but what was said there really isn't recorded. But John decides, you know what, I want to record that last discourse between the disciples and Jesus in detail. So he gives us several chapters here as he wraps up his book. I know we've got all the way to chapter 21 of John, but there's several chapters recording the dialogue. Jesus is no longer, the rest of this gospel, he's no longer presenting the gospel message, which is really the truth of who he is, to the people out there. He's now talking to the people in the church, the disciples, his inner core of his ministry. So this is the final presentation of Jesus' ministry, of Jesus of himself to the people. And that's light. Jesus giving the light of truth to the people. Now, of course, some accept, which become part of the early church, and some reject, right? And we're going to go through that. Why is that so? Why do people stay in darkness? Why is there some that make the choice, right? So we see actually in this passage very clearly that God somehow foreordained that, knew it was going to happen, understood that they were going to reject him, and it sounds kind of confusing, but ultimately they made the choice to reject God. And they refused Christ's offer and have rejected him and stayed in their darkness. So our point number 1, darkness. We're going to break this up into a few different subpoints. First one is people do not believe because they have a problem with miracles. Why is it that people don't believe? That's going to be the discussion that we're talking about. It's a dark world for those who do not believe in miracles. Okay, first of all, we need to define what is a miracle. Well, a miracle could be almost any answer to prayer, right? But really, a miracle in its essence, in its truest form, as C.S. Lewis defined it, is something that breaks the natural laws, right? We were talking this morning about the Creator who created the world. He put in force the laws of gravity, which later Newton discovered, right? Dropped an apple, what does it do? It falls, right? And then we understand the principles of gravity, and then he expanded it even further. It wasn't just dropping an apple. That makes Newton sound like not a very intelligent guy. But he expanded that and said, hey, this is how gravity affects the universe and the planets and how they spin around and they stay in their courses and all these things that God designed. But there's all these natural laws. Water flows downhill, right? That's one of those natural laws. How many have you ever seen water flow uphill? It never happens, right? It's just one of those natural laws. But again, the principle of gravity. There's just endless natural laws that we can accept. The law of harvest, which we talked about last week. You put a seed in the ground, it dies, and then it comes back and produces fruit. That's the law of the harvest. Those are natural laws that God put in order in place. But every once in a while, the Creator who created those natural laws breaks them. And that's called a miracle. And what happens? Let's look at some of those. We have water changing into wine. There you have a molecular change. Something that is water is now suddenly wine. We see that recorded in the beginning of the Gospel of John. Let's go back to the Old Testament in Exodus, the water parting for the Israelites. Remember that, right? I mean, that is not a natural thing. Water flows downhill, like I explained. You guys see this all the time, but all of a sudden, water which was flowing downhill suddenly stopped. The water parted, and these people were able to walk through. And then just as the Egyptians ran in there, what happened? Water came down. Natural law was suddenly back in place, and they were swimming, right, and drowning. So, and they didn't drown in the Sea of Reeds. That would have been an even bigger miracle. People drowning in a little pond. That would have been really big. So, no, it was a big body of water. They drowned in that big body of water. Some natural law was broken. A lame man walking. That's, again, a natural law. The physics in his leg, the muscles and stuff are broken. They're to a point where he cannot stand. And all of a sudden, a miracle takes place, changes those muscles, the tendons, the things that are necessary for him to stand up. And all of a sudden, what is he doing? He's not just walking, but he's dancing, he's leaping. It's okay to do that in church. Please don't excommunicate me. So, and he's getting excited about what Jesus did for him. Leprosy is cleansed. Here's again another natural law. Once you get leprosy, you don't get over it, especially biblical leprosy. The leprosy we see today is not as extreme of a form that they seem to have been encountering at that time. You died pretty much of it. You were excluded from the community because of it was very contagious, again, which is different from modern day leprosy. It's not as contagious as ancient leprosy. It was very contagious. You excluded from the community. You stayed there till you died. You lived in a leper colony for the rest of your life. But here what happened? Jesus cleansed these 9 lepers. He sent them to the priest. And you know what? God in his Levitical law said, hey, if someone ever gets healed of leprosy, this is what's supposed to happen. And can you imagine the priest? He's reading through that and he goes, you know what? When was the last time I saw somebody come in here cleansed of leprosy? Never happened. Never happened. Why would God instruct something that never happened? It's a law that takes place. But all of a sudden these guys walk in and the priest is like, whoa, we got to look up that passage again. What does it say? We've never had this happen. We've never had somebody walk in here cleansed of leprosy. This will never happen. That part of their books were just, they'd never opened that part because dealing with a leper who's been cleansed, this never happens. And all of a sudden it happens. It breaks that natural law. Jesus breaks the natural, and a miracle takes place. A dead man rising from the grave. That's a pretty natural, that's a natural law. We all die. Everybody dies. I'm sorry, it's going to happen. Someday you're going to die. And usually when you die, you stay dead. We've had actually several funerals here. How many of you have seen those people walking around again? They haven't seen them, right? They're gone. Sometimes we talk about ghosts and things like that, and that's something different. No, they don't come back in their bodily form and come walking back around. But here's Lazarus. He's dead. He's in the ground. He's starting to stink, as Martha carefully pointed out for us, which means the body is now decomposing. He's not just unconscious. Your body doesn't start decomposing until you're gone. He's decomposing, and God heals him, breaks that natural law, and he comes back from the dead. So we have modern man who does not believe in miracles, same as back then, right? See, they were seeing all these miracles firsthand, and they weren't believing them. That's what it says right there in verse 37. Verse 37 says, but though he had done so many miracles before them, yet they believed him not. They didn't believe in the miracles. They saw these things firsthand. They were there standing there when the lame man was now suddenly jumping around. They saw lepers get cleansed. They saw blind men get seen, and they still didn't believe. And then we wonder today why modern man has the same trouble, right? Modern scholars, they go back and read through the Old Testament. They read those miracles of water getting parted. No way that can happen. We don't observe that in nature, so it's not a miracle. We don't believe in miracles. It doesn't happen. So they got to rearrange and put all these theories about, this was written later and this was written by somebody else, and they have to discredit it because they don't believe in the miracles. We've been going through Matthew, and we've talking about the timeline in our men's Bible study. Where does Matthew fall in? When did he write it? Pretty shortly after the time of Christ, really, if you think about it. But modern scholars go through and they read through and they go in Mark, and they read Mark, and here's Jesus, and he says, in a certain amount of time, This temple won't even be standing. One brick won't even be on top of each other. It's going to be completely leveled off, which to people at the time, they're like, no way in the world. We don't even have the tools to knock that building down. It's so strong. There's no way in the world that's going to happen. So how could somebody at that time, they say, okay, well, there's no way Jesus could have made that prediction. So what we need to do is move the writing of Mark till after 70 AD, when that did actually take place. Jesus predicted it came true. The Romans came in with some tools that nobody had. I don't think we even really quite understand to this day. They had something, and they knocked that building down and scraped it off. It's not there. You can go there to the place where the temple was supposed to be. Jesus has predicted the destruction of the temple in his time, and then of course it happened in 70 AD. You can go there, and there's a different building standing there. Okay, you can get into all the politics of that, but it's not there. Okay, somebody scraped it off, and Jesus predicted that. And modern day scholars who don't believe in miracles say, okay, then there's no way Jesus could have done that, so we need to place the writing of Mark later. He didn't write it, or he based it off some other document, something else. Anyways, they have to rearrange it because they don't believe in the miracles. They don't believe in the predictions of the Old Testament, very like Isaiah, knowing these things about Jesus Christ, that we're going to see these predictions, these reports. People have a problem with miracles. And when you don't believe that God can break his own natural laws, these observable natural laws, water flows downhill, gravity always has its effect, then you start to break down your belief in the Bible. Now, you can imagine an investigator who investigates crime. Is he an honest investigator when he comes to it at crime and he says, well, I don't see this happening, I don't believe that could happen, so I'm just going to dismiss that possibility? Is that an honest investigator? Will he come to the truth? Probably not. It's not till we come to the crime scene, if you will, or we come to the truth and we say, you know what? Even if it breaks the laws of nature, I'm going to be open to that possibility. And I'm going to keep studying this till we come to the truth. And it was the same for them at that time. They had a problem with the miracles. They didn't believe in him. So people who do not believe in miracles, it's a dark world for them. The people did not believe because they rejected the report, the word of God. We see that in verse 38a, the beginning there of verse 38. It said that the saying of Isaiah the prophet might be fulfilled, which he spake, the Lord spake, Lord, who hath believed our report? Okay, what is a report? You can imagine in a courtroom, what do you bring in? You can't go back in time and see the crime and the actual events. I know there's tons of movies about that, but to this day we don't have that technology. So what do you bring in? You bring in witnesses who were there at the time, who can validate what happened, right? So you can imagine a judge, you bring in a witness, and the guy says, you know, I was there, I saw this guy shoot this other guy. And the judge doesn't believe him. Bring in another witness. He says, I was standing there too. And I give him a report of what happened. This is what happened. Judge doesn't believe him. Is he a good judge? No, he's not a good judge. Especially when you bring in 2, 3, 4, 5 witnesses. And what do we have from the Old Testament? Multiple witnesses. Writing shortly after the fact, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. John is probably the latest gospel to be written in 90 AD, which of course, remember Jesus died in 33 AD. That's only 33 years later. Matthew was probably written only maybe 20 or less years after the time of Christ. Written shortly thereafter. They do not believe the accounts. And this is important, and it's what Isaiah predicted. They're not going to believe it. Even of our day, he's making a prediction today where they're not going to believe the accounts, the records, the reports that are written down. These Gospels are not just works of fiction. They're not just somebody making something up off the top of their head. They're saying, this is an accurate account of what I saw. Even maybe those guys that wrote it down, they may say, I don't even know how some of this stuff happened. I don't know how these natural laws could be broken. Jesus did these miracles, but yet I'm going to write it down as I saw it, and honestly and openly. Is it an honest witness who doesn't tell the whole truth? No, it's a dishonest witness. These guys reported accurately. They did not believe. John chapter 5, verse 46. That'll be our next slide here. John chapter 5, verse 46 and 47 says, For had ye believed Moses, ye would have believed me, for he wrote of me. But ye believe not his writings. How shall ye believe my words? Basically, he says, hey, You've got it. You've got the Bible. You have the Old Testament. And there again, why is the Old Testament still important, relevant for us today? Because it talks of Jesus Christ. It validates, again, who Jesus Christ is. The prophecy dealing with him. And he says, hey, Moses wrote of me. You didn't believe Moses. How are you going to believe me now? And that's really what the essence of what they had strayed. They said that they were Moses' disciples, but they were not Moses' disciples. They had rejected his words himself. And we see that too. I mean, this way we've been studying the first accounts there in Genesis, and what do we see? God creating man in our image. What is that? A Trinity. And they no longer believed in the Trinity. And that concept. They had rejected that. And even further still, most of the Jews at the time of Jesus Christ were called Sadducees. They rejected the concept of a resurrection. They said there's no life after death. Once you die, that's it. And we see that also in the Old Testament. It's sometimes hard to find. You have to look really closely, but it's there. And that's why the Pharisees, of course, argued against that. But so they had begun to reject the teachings of Moses, the Old Testament, the report, the accurate report that's given to them. When we start to reject this as the Word of God, we will lose what we know about God, because this is his revelation to us. So they didn't believe the report, which is most importantly. There again, this brings us to our next point. People do not believe because they have no personal experience with God. And that's darkness, right? It's a dark world for those who have no personal experience with God. Because that's part of our foundation of our faith, right? We have the written report, which is this is God's word, right? If we got to believe in this. And then what happens? We get saved, we believe the message of the gospel, and we start to have a personal experience, right? With God, and that becomes a foundation of our faith. Now, it's a foundation for my personal faith. Personal experiences are good for you to have, but they may not necessarily be a foundation for somebody else's faith. And that's why, again, I stress the Word of God, most importantly, over all things. And I totally agree. There's some people in this church, they've had amazing, wonderful experiences. And they don't always share them. Sometimes it's good to share them, and it's wonderful to share them, and it's great. It helps encourage us. But they say, hey, look to Jesus. Look to Jesus. That's the most important thing. Don't get distracted with personal experience. Personal experience is important. It builds my personal faith. It's good for me. It helps validate what I know is in the Bible. But yet it's not going to be something that we as a church can stand on. We can stand on this report and this report alone. But yet, personal experience is important. Our experiences with God, each and every one of you should have a personal experience, a personal relationship with God. You can believe the report all day long, but if you don't have personal experiences, personal validations of your faith is going to be very small indeed. There was one sermon I did a number of weeks ago where I went through and talked about how God provided over and over and over again in my family's life. I remember there was a period in my family's life we did not purchase a car for I don't know how many years. It was probably 15 years. People just kept giving us cars. Now, they weren't always good, but we kept getting cars. And then we never, ever missed a Sunday, even though our church was 30 minutes drive away. We never, ever missed a Sunday because God provided cars, car after car after car, and those cars would die. And then God would provide another car. But the stories are endless of God's provision. Those are personal experiences, healings. Maybe some of you have seen God break the natural laws. You've witnessed something like that. Someone who has cancer and they're suddenly healed. That's a natural law. They should die of that. But then God suddenly intervenes and there's a miracle take place. I'm sure if we got together and we were able to share our personal experiences, there would be hundreds of them. And they build our faith and they're wonderful. Have those personal experiences. Remember them, treasure them, journal them. But these people have no personal experience. And there again, they don't believe in the miracles. So they see a man, like we've been studying in Matthew, this man comes into the synagogue there with a withered hand, and all they want to talk about is how Jesus broke the law by healing him on the Sabbath day. When that's your focus, you're going to miss the beautiful, wonderful things of life. Where is your focus? Do you see the miracles that God does for you every day? People do not believe because it was foretold. Let's look at Isaiah chapter 53, verse 1. Who hath believed our report? This is Isaiah writing 700 years before the time of Christ, which John quotes here in our passage in verse 38 through 40. Who hath believed our report, and to whom is the arm of the Lord revealed? There's a report revealed, personal experience. And he shall grow up before him as a tender plant. This is speaking of Jesus Christ, 700 years before his birth. See if you can see some parallels here, just yourself, knowing who Christ is. And he shall grow up before them as a tender plant, a root out of a dry ground. He hath no form, nor comeliness, and when they see him, there is no beauty that they should desire him. He was nobody special. He wasn't any special good-looking guy. He just looked like the regular average Joe Blow out there. He was despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows. Boy, haven't we seen that as we've been going through the Gospel of John over and over again? We don't want to believe in you. Why are you teaching these things? Question after question, challenge after challenge after challenge. Acquainted with grief, he was hid, as it were, from our faces from him. We hid, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he hath borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. We did esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. But he was wounded, verse 5, for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. And the chastisement of our peace was upon him. And with his stripes we were healed. Christ was crucified here. They were predicting the beating of Christ, which was against Roman law. It was against the law to beat someone and then crucify them. Jesus was unique in his time period. Nobody else had that happen to them. And here is Isaiah predicting that it's going to happen. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way. The Lord hath laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He was brought as a lamb to the slaughter, and sheep before his shearers. So dumb, he did not open his mouth. What he's saying is that, hey, Jesus will not give a defense. And remember that in the court of the prosecution of Jesus Christ, Jesus did not say a word until he was commanded to by the high priest to then say a word. And then it's finally when he said, "Thou sayest it." He just repeated what they said. Isaiah chapter 6, verses 4 and 5. To the next slide. There we go. And the post of the door moved, and the voice of him that cried, and the house was filled with smoke. Then said I, Woe is me, for I am undone. This is Isaiah speaking there in chapter 6. Because I am a man of unclean lips, and I've dwelt in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For mine eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then flew one of the seraphims unto me, having a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with the tongs from off the altar, and laid it upon my mouth, and said, Lo, this hath touched my lips. Thine iniquity is taken away, thy sin is purged. Also I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? Then said I, Here am I, send me. It's funny how the willingness of Isaiah, there's one, he just, send me. I'm here, I'm available. And then it says there, this is prophesied, this is what's dealt with in our passage, verses 9 and 10 of Isaiah chapter 6. And he said, Go and tell this people, hear ye indeed, but not understand, and see ye indeed, but perceive not. Isaiah is saying, hey, they're going to see these things with their own eyes, and they're still not going to listen to them. Make the heart of this people fat. It's funny how the Hebrew word for the hardening of the heart has a root in fat, which modern science didn't discover till later. The hardening of the arteries stops the heart to work from fat. Anyways, interesting side note. And make their ears heavy, which basically it means they harden their hearts. Make their ears heavy and shut their eyes, lest they see with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their heart and convert and be healed. God says, hey, I'm going to shut their eyes. I'm going to shut their hearts to this truth. Remember Pharaoh in the Old Testament? He continually rejected the truth until God said, okay, I'm going to harden your heart against it. You will no longer be able to accept it because you made the choice to reject it. People do not believe because God has blinded their eyes. And we see that here in verse 40. Back in John. And he hath blinded their eyes and hardened their hearts, that they should not see with their eyes, nor understand with their heart, and be converted, and I should heal them. He's quoting Isaiah, not quoting him directly, but he's paraphrasing what he's saying. People do not believe because they've shut their eyes. It is a dark world for those who have shut their eyes to the truth. Remember in John chapter 9, verse 25 through 28, and he answered and said, Wherein he be a sinner, or no, I know not. One thing I know, that whereas I was blind, now I see. Then said they unto him, What did he to thee? How opened he thine eyes? So they said, okay, validate the miracle. Tell us. And he answered them, and he said, I have told you already. I've already told you the whole thing. I've given you an honest report, an honest account, and you did not hear. They weren't listening to him because they didn't want to hear. Wherefore ye hear it again. Will ye also be his disciples? And they reviled him. Thou art his disciple, but we are Moses' disciple. They rejected the truth. People who do not believe, like I said, about the judge. You imagine the witnesses coming in, sharing the truth, and he continually rejects it. That's not a good judge. That's not a good judge. People who do not believe in God because God has hardened their hearts. It is a dark world for those who have hardened their hearts against God. Is there a point where there is no more hope for someone? I'd say yes and no. Yes, because yes. If you continually harden your heart against God, God will allow you to continue to harden your heart, and he will blind your eyes to the truth, and you will no longer be able to accept it. But yet, can you still be saved in that position? Yeah. Remember Saul changed his name to Paul? He was in that position. He continually hardened his heart against God, and God finally said, hey, I'm going to intervene here and stop this. So yes, you can reject God to the point where you are on your way to damnation, but God can still intervene, even in that position. Let's look at Romans chapter 1, verse 24 and following. Wherefore God gave them up to uncleanness. This is God giving them up to uncleanness. Why would God do something to do that to anyone? Through the lust of their own hearts. There again, God did it, but yet who originally made the choice? They did. They said, no, I don't want God. I want the lust of my own heart. They rejected God, and God said, okay, I'll give you up to it. I'll basically grant you what you want. Careful what you pray for, right? Careful what you ask for. Careful what you seek. To dishonor their own bodies between them. Hey, whoa, there's some really strong language that Paul is using here. And it comes through in English a little bit, but to dishonor their own bodies, that's a pretty negative thing. Who changed the truth of God into a lie and worshiped and served the creature more than the Creator. You know, we've been talking about creation in Sunday school. Highly recommend. You need to come if you're not coming to the Sunday school class. We're just having a great time of discussion. It's just actually very powerful this morning. What some of you guys shared almost brought me to tears. Just you guys, the heart, that you guys begin to open your hearts to this truth, and you express from your lives and your accounts and your testimonies. Remember, personal experience is also a good thing when based on the accurate report of the Word of God. They've rejected the Creator. That's the Father, right? The Father, the Father, the Father. What does Jesus keep saying over and over and over again? You're not seeing me. You're seeing the Father. You're not seeing the Creator, the Creator, the Creator of all things. They've rejected the Creator. They've started to worship the creature, who is blessed forever. Amen. For this cause, God gave them up unto vile affections. For even their women did change to the natural use unto them, which is against nature. And I think you adults can realize what's being talked about there. Things are getting really messed up. That's why we were talking about this morning. God created man and woman. He created them male and female. He had specific roles for them and design. It was a wonderful and beautiful thing. And then man said, no, I don't like that wonderful, beautiful thing. I want to change it into some kind of perversion and destruction. And that's basically what they begin to do when God gives them to their own lusts. Likewise, also having men leaving the natural use of a woman burned in their own lust one toward another, men with men, working that which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves the recompense of their error, which is meat. Don't believe the lies that are being told. The people who live in sin have good health. No. It destroys your body. It destroys everything about you. And especially when we are given to our lusts. Even as they did not retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a what? A reprobate mind, to do those things which are not convenient, those things which are destructive. Basically is what the word that Paul uses there. God said, okay, you want to choose darkness? This is what we're talking about. We're talking darkness, light. You want to choose darkness? I'll let you have it. And it will destroy you. In every area, body, soul, mind, spirit. All three of the areas we're talking about this morning. Destroy you completely. People do not believe because they need healing. Isn't that the truth? They need healing. We all need healing, right? It's a dark world for those that need healing. We need healing in every area, body, soul, and spirit, right? People need the Lord, but if you reject His offer, He will let you go to damnation. People do not believe. This is the next point, H. People do not believe because they fear man more than they fear God. It is a dark world for those that fear man more than they fear God. And we talk about the fear of God, and we go, whoa, that sounds a little scary. Sorry, no pun intended. But maybe it is intended. It is a little scary to think of an almighty, all-powerful God who can break the laws of nature. That is a pretty powerful thing. Remember, Jesus is standing there. Jesus is sleeping in the boat. Storms all around him. The guys are scared. They're like, oh my goodness, we're going to die. These guys were experienced sailors, right? They didn't get scared easily, okay? And they weren't like little children. These were men, grown-up men, and they're terrified. And they wake Jesus up, and what does Jesus do? He says, hey, stop. And he stops instantly. And then what happens? They're like, yay! No, they're like, we're even more scared. We thought it was scary, the storm, but all of a sudden, this guy who can stop it all right there and then there, he's even more scary. Whoa! They were even more afraid. And then Jesus finally had to tell them, don't be afraid. Because I'm here to protect you. I'm here to love you, to care for you. An all-powerful God is a scary God. But yet there's a comfort in a scary God. That sounds kind of weird, isn't it, right? Well, go back if you really want to know the puzzle of that. In the English language, we have this problem. What's the difference between awful and awesome? Same English root word, awe. But yet there's two facets to it. What is scary is all-powerful. But yet you can't have all-power. Without all-powerful, you can't have all-protecting. Matthew 10, verse 28 and following there. Matthew 10, 28 through 31. Fear not them which are able to kill the body, but are not able to kill the soul, but rather fear him which is able to destroy both body and soul in hell. Now, I could just read that verse to you, and I'd be like, wow, that's a pretty powerful thought. But what's the very next verse after that verse? Are not 2 sparrows sold for a farthing, and one of them shall not fall to the ground without your Father, but the very hairs of your head are numbered? Verse 30, fear ye not therefore, for ye are more value than sparrows. There again, right there in Matthew. Now, we could take that verse out of context. We kind of get a little bit lost in, the fear of God. But there's no comfort in God until he is fearful, until he is all-powerful, until he is almighty. Right? We use that word, but sometimes we don't think about the meaning of almighty. So God can kill the soul. We're supposed to fear him. But yet when we fear him, then we realize, these men that can kill the body, there's no need to fear them. Because the God who can destroy both body and soul cares about the very hairs on my head. How many of you know how many hairs are on your head? I'm going to take my hand. Oh, we got one. Most of us don't, right? Too many to count. But God knows the very hairs on your head. So, darkness, light. Now we're on to light. Point number 2. We're going to try to go through this quickly here. To believe in the Son of Man, the Son means merely believe in the Father. And this is what Jesus is, again, he's been saying this over and over and over again. I'm not just representing myself. I'm representing the Father, the Creator. I think about, I want to preface this a little bit, but when my son tells me, I love you, Dad. Doesn't that make you, when you hear that from your children, doesn't it make you appreciate your parents more? It's like I want to call my dad up and go, I love you, Dad. I should have said that more. It means so much when I hear it from my son. But you think about, without the Father, there is no Son. And all of a sudden, you think, my son wouldn't be here without me. But wait a minute, I wouldn't be here without my dad. I'm here because of him in so many different ways. I praise God for a good, godly father. I love that. And that's what Jesus is saying. Hey, this God of the Old Testament that seems kind of scary, he seems kind of powerful. He has the power to spank you or not spank you, or discipline you or not discipline you. Show you love through discipline. I chasten whom I love. It says in Hebrews, that's in the New Testament. It says that God is something that we love. We love that God, and I represent that God. And I'm not just saying my own stuff. It's what Jesus is saying. I'm representing God. See that verses 44 through 45, 47 through 48 here back in John. Let's take the next point here. To highlight what we're saying here, he that believes on the Son believes on the Father. Let's think about Paul. Remember Paul, Acts chapter 17. Should be our next scripture passage there. We don't really have time to read through all of this, so you can just go ahead and skip on through some of the slides there, Roy. But in the end, go to the last, not the last one of those. Keep going. There you go. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Oh, back one. Back two. There we go. Verse 31. You can see it right up there on the screen. Because he hath appointed a day. He's basically, up to this point, he gives an argument. He says, hey, you guys know who this unknown God is. You don't even know his name, but you know. See, let's give a little context to this, actually, back up a little bit. The Athenians, the Greeks, they had collected gods from all over the world. They went everywhere. They said, you know what? There's lots of gods out there, but we want to make sure we're safe, so we're just going to worship them all. That was their theory. But yet, there was a city known for having more gods than every other city. They brought gods from all over the world and set up idols and said, okay, we'll cover all the bases and hopefully we'll be okay. It was kind of their philosophy. And so Paul walks in there and he goes, hey, I see a god to this, idol to this god, idol to this. All of a sudden he finds an altar to the unknown God. One altar. Originally there were built 7 of these altars. And you have to go back to the story and to Greek history to kind of understand what Paul's talking about. He says, hey, there's an altar here to the unknown God. You know that even though you worship all these gods, you still know there's a creator who created everything. And he's the father of all things. And there's a God out there that's who's supreme over all these gods. You know it. And how do they know it? Well, let's go back into Greek history. There was this king in Greek history called King Megalus. And he committed some sin that offended God. And God sent a plague on the Greek people. And they said, we've got all these gods. We worship all these gods, and we've been praying to all these gods, and this plague is not going away. There is some God that controls plagues and the laws of nature that we've got to call on. And they said, we don't know his name, but we're going to build, actually one of the teachers there, he said, you build 7 altars and make sacrifices to this God, and you say, please forgive me of this sin. And that's what they did. They built 7 altars. They said, we don't know his name, so we're just going to write on there, unknown God. We don't know who you are, but we know you're out there and you're control all these things. So we're going to make all these altars and make sacrifices. And you say, please forgive us. And that unknown God stayed that plague and stopped. And Paul said that day when he walked up on that Mars Hill, which was all surrounded by all these gods, he said, there's only one of these altars left. The memory was almost lost. All the other altars have been destroyed, moved, taken down. One left. He said, hey, you guys know that there is a creator of all things who controls all the events in the universe, who is the supreme being over all these things, who's in control of all these gods, and I know who he is. And he sent his son, Jesus Christ. That's what he wraps up his message with. They don't disagree with him at all to this point. They sit there fascinated, listening, because they know what he's saying is the truth every second. And these are the greatest minds of the world in that time. They sit there in awestruck, listening to Paul say one word after another, all the way through these verses. We just scrolled through all of them there. All the way there to verse 31. Let's see if I get in my notes here. Yeah, here we go. A little lost. Verse 31. Because he hath appointed a day in the which he will judge the world in righteousness by that man. One man in history is going to come to this earth and die on the cross for all of us. That's what he's saying. Jesus Christ, whom he hath ordained, whereof he hath given assurance to all men that he hath raised him from the dead. You know what? I think Paul would have continued his message from that point. He would have said, you know who this man is? It's Jesus Christ. And if you accept him, you can have salvation. You don't have to worship all these gods. You can let all those altars fall down. You can just make one altar to the God Almighty through Jesus Christ. You can worship him. His sermon would have kept going and going. But then, what did they do? Verse 32, and when they had heard the resurrection of the dead, some mocked and others said, we'll hear this matter again. They interrupted him. Well, up to this point, there was no interruption. Everyone sat because they knew what he was speaking was truth. And they listened, and they listened, and they listened, and they listened. And then all of a sudden, he said, resurrection. And so most of them, no. Because what were the two great philosophies in Greece at the time? One was Stoicism, which believed that you had to live the best you could. You rejected all worldly comforts. You were stoic. We still use the word today, stoic. And you rejected all worldly comforts. You lived a moral, upright lifestyle, and that was the best you could do, and then you died, and you went into the hole under the ground, and that was it. And the opposing philosophy was, hey man, peace out, live it to the hilt. Do every sensual, wonderful thing that you could possibly do. You know, there are no laws, break them all. You know, the Epicureans. And these two butted heads. They argued all the time. But their belief ended in you die, you go in a hole in the ground, and that's it. So both of these guys, they had opposing world philosophies, but they both did not believe in the resurrection. They rejected him. So Paul didn't. He just stopped. He walked off the stage. They didn't want to hear it. Remember, our Jews, they didn't want, the Jewish establishment of Jesus' time, they didn't want to hear it. Paul didn't keep preaching. When he knew that was it, he just walked away. But you know, there was one guy who was named Dionysius who said, Paul, don't go anywhere. Stop. I got to know who that man is. And if you look at the history of that man's name, you know what it was? It was a Greek god who had been resurrected back to life. And this guy said, you know what? Resurrection is true. And I got to know the man that can really, honestly, truly give it to me. And Paul was able to explain to that man who this man, who he mentions there in verse 31, was. They reject God and all these things. To believe on the Son of God is to believe on the Creator. All these things they agreed with. They said, hey, there is a supreme being. But then when they came to resurrection, they wanted to reject it. And that's the same of the people of Jesus' day. It's the same with people today. They don't believe in the resurrection. They don't believe in the miraculous. There again, we start with the miraculous, and we're still ending with it. To believe in the Son of God is to walk in the light. You know, I remember I was shared a little bit. We're really running out of time here. I shared a little bit about my dad, but you know, about loving your dad. I remember my dad when he first came. And I've shared this in the past, but when he first got saved, he was reading an atheist magazine. And some Christian who was part of his ecology corps, they were working there. My dad had been drafted and was working there in the ecology corps here in California, actually over there in Bishop. And another believer who was part of his group said, hey, I'm going to go share the gospel with him. And he went over there and shared his personal experience, his testimony. And he said, this is how to get saved. And my dad said, you know what? I don't believe in the God of the Bible, Old Testament, but there's something about this Jesus Christ that I want. And he accepted that Jesus Christ. But all through my dad's life, he always validated his faith. And he never let us doubt ours. I remember, and this is where truth comes in. You know, we talk about, yes, the core of the gospel message is Jesus Christ dying on the cross for our sins. And yes, you may not even believe Genesis, first couple chapters of Genesis, or the way it's recorded there. But you could still be saved. You could still, my dad was. He was reading an evolutionary magazine when the guy preached the gospel to him and he accepted it. And then later on in his life, he realized, hey, this truth applies to every area of the Bible. Genesis, all of it. And I remember he would always validate his faith. I remember we went to the La Brea Tar Pits as I was a little kid at this time. La Brea Tar Pits. Do you even know where the La Brea Tar Pits are in Southern California? Maybe some of you have been there. And we started reading the signs and, you know, getting what the park was telling us about the La Brea Tar Pits. And it was a very evolutionary standpoint. And my dad said, you know, this is wrong. This is wrong because I believe that at one time, the Bible, like it records in the Bible, that there was a flood. And I don't believe the story is accurate. So my dad started doing research and more research. He actually got to the point where he couldn't find any more books on the topic. So he asked the dean of the collections there at the La Brea Tar Pits, he said, can I please begin to investigate the actual notes of the guys who dug it out of the ground, all these bones. I want to look at those, and I want to look at the bones themselves. My dad started looking through the notes. He started seeing a very different story than the story that they were portrayed. Because these guys, again, honest report. What do? As they're digging it out, they're like, interesting bone, write that down. It was in such and such material, such and such a place. And he started to look at these notes and began to put it back together. My dad realized, no, this doesn't reject the biblical account. It confirms the biblical account. It confirms that there was a flood. Every bit of this is evidence for the flood. So my dad put together an article on it. He went to the Dean of Collections there at the La Brea Tar Pits. And he sat him down and he said, would you read this article that I wrote? This is my dad. He cared so much for us to know the truth. He wanted to build our faith in every way. He didn't want us doubting our faith so much that he went that far. Sat down with the Dean of Collections there and he said, would you please read my article? And would you correct it? If there's anything you disagree with, would you tell me? The guy read through the article. And he came back to my dad and he said, you know what, I don't have anything against anything that you wrote, even though it's all from a biblical perspective and you say that this validates the flood. So even though I don't agree with it, I'm not gonna correct anything you say. He said, I have only one correction to make. And that is, you shouldn't call it saber-toothed tiger. That's an old term. You should call it saber-toothed cat. That was it. And my dad asked him, well, what about the story that you present to the public that comes? I said, you know that that's not the truth. And you know what the Dean of Collection says? Yes, I recognize that that's not the truth. But we don't have anything better, and we're not going to change it. Whoa. My dad has done leading research on this topic. Nobody else in science has done the research that had gone as far as he went. And he discovered that this validated the Bible. And that built our faith. Walk in light. We're going to skip John 1, 5 through 10, which is the discussion on life. We're going to do the last point here. We're going to wrap up with this. To believe in the Son is to obey the commandment of the Father. My father was so passionate about his faith that he wanted to validate it in every area. And he wanted to validate it for us. That he went and did the research for us. He now, today, if you're interested in going to the La Brea Tar Pits, you can take a tour with him. And he'll give it to you from a biblical perspective. He has permission from the people who own the grounds there to go and do that. And they say, please come. Tell them. Doesn't matter. Even though it completely contradicts the story we're telling the public, you're welcome to explain it to anyone who is interested. My dad continually does regular tours for people who are interested in understanding the La Brea Tar Pits from a biblical perspective. But my father also believed in obeying the commands of Christ. He wanted to know what was taught in the Bible, what was commanded us. See, that's what Jesus said. He said, these aren't my commands. These are my Father's commands. These are the Creator of all things commands. And they're for every area of your life. And I remember another thing that my dad did all throughout our life, and this is something I desperately want to follow in my family, is he got us and sat us down every day to read the Bible. It didn't matter what was going on in his life. It didn't matter if he was struggling in his life. There were times my dad struggled. He questioned, he doubted, struggled with things, had hard times, had times of very severe poverty where we didn't even know where our next meal was coming from. But we always, even if we didn't know where the next meal was coming from, my dad would sit us down and we'd read the Bible. And I value that. Jesus says, hey, if you love me, keep my commandments. This is John 14, verse 5. John 14, verse 15. John 14, 23, which is the next slide. Jesus answered and said unto him, if any man love me, he will keep my words. These are valuable for life unto you. My Father will love him, and he will come unto him, and will make our abode with him. And what if Christ one of the commandments? It's to be born again. If you've never been born again, and that's what I will wrap up with this morning. You know what Jesus tells Nicodemus? He's a great moral man. But Jesus told him, hey, you need to be born again. You might think, oh, well, I've done a lot of good things in my life. But Jesus would say to you, you need to be born again. Have you been born again? Has everyone in this room been born again? Let's go ahead and bow for prayer. Like everyone, bow their heads, close their eyes. If you've never given your life to Christ, you cannot look back on a time when you said, you know what, God, I want to follow you. I want to give my life to you. I want to understand these commandments that you've given to me. I want to live my life for you. If you've never done that, I want you to do that this morning. See, I'm going to pray a prayer. You can repeat after me. Dear Lord Jesus, I am a sinner. You can repeat it quietly. If you want to read it out loud, that's fine too. I am a sinner and I need forgiveness. Will you forgive me of my sin? Would you come into my heart and change my heart to be like yours? And I give my life to you. Pray these things in your name. Amen. If you're praying that, keep everyone's heads bowed, eyes closed. If you're praying that for the first time, would you please raise your hand? Never prayed that prayer or a prayer like it in the past. Would you please raise your hand? I really encourage you, if you didn't pray that prayer this morning, you would like to know more about that, talk to someone. Do not let this issue go. This is the greatest commandment that Christ ever gave, is to be born again. Give your life to Christ. Please do not leave this room. The Bible says today is the day of salvation. If you've never given your life to Christ, do it. Do not leave this building. Talk to someone. Say, hey, what do I need to do to be saved? What does it mean to be born again? What do I need to do? I've never done anything like that. Do it. Make that choice. See, when you make that choice, then God gives you the grace to overcome. Maybe some of you prayed this morning. You've renewed that. There was a time you remember you prayed that prayer. You made that commitment to God, but then you feel like you need to do it again. No, really, to be honest, us believers, we got to do that every day, right? Say, God, I've sinned. Would you please forgive me? Would you heal me? And if you're doing that again today, you're recommitting your life. You pray that prayer again. Would you please raise your hand? Anyone here this morning? Wonderful. Put your hands down. Dear Lord Jesus, God, give it all. Lord, I do pray, God, if there's anyone in this room, Lord, who's never made the choice. Yes, they understand the Bible's true. They want to believe. They see the truth of what's being said here this morning. They see the truth of who you are being presented. Lord, I pray to God that they would not harden their hearts against it, but would say, God, I want to accept it. God, I need this. That they would give their lives to Christ. Lord, that's what it's all about. Lord, we're about ready to have community here in a few minutes, and that's our only qualification here at this church. We don't sit you down and ask you questions. We don't make sure that you're a good guy, or we don't do anything else. We just say, hey, are you trusting in Jesus Christ as your Savior? Because if we miss that, Lord, we've missed it all. And I pray, God, this morning that you would work in the hearts. Lord, there's a number of people who raise their hand and say, God, I want to recommit my life to Christ. Here today, I know I prayed that prayer in the past, but I need to pray it again. I need to keep praying and say, God, I give my life to you. I give it all to you. Because I believe what is the report. I believe the experience that I've prayed, Lord. I've seen the face of God, and I know it's smiling on me. Lord, I just pray, God, that today we would call repentance, Lord. Reject our hearts, all that stuff that we want to pile in there, and open the door to Jesus Christ. Lord, I just pray, God, this morning that you would work in the hearts. Lord, work in us believers. Lord, yes, we've made the commitment at one time, but we've gotten shaky in it. We no longer pray like we used to pray. We don't even believe in the miracles like we used to believe in the miracles. We don't even preach the gospel like we used to preach the gospel. We don't even live the life the way we're supposed to live the life. And we know the truth. And God, you hold us to a higher accountability because we know the truth and we've accepted the truth. And I pray, God, this morning that we would repent of that. We'd turn our hearts back to it. Lord, I pray, God, that we'd surrender all to you. I surrender all. I surrender all. Lord, I just pray, God, this morning that we surrender all to you. I pray these things in your name. Amen.